Thank you, Tom, for the introduction, and good morning to those of you who are here and joining us for this session. I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things I've learned as a faculty member. I've been at the University of Kansas for about 10 years, and one of the things I did when I started was intentionally focused on visiting companies, trying to network with the local entrepreneurship community in Kansas, in the Kansas City area, and figure out what companies want and try to integrate that into my research approach. Just a quick acknowledgement to the people that are currently working in my laboratory and some of our funding sources, as well as on the bottom row there is the companies that I've co-founded and some of the industry sponsors we've worked with. I'll talk a little bit about each of those, except for Orion Biosciences. That's a new company out of our laboratory focused on ocular drug delivery products. So the first thing you have to ask yourself as a university professor or even as a researcher working in a laboratory is, what is your goal? What are you trying to do with your research effort? And I think a lot of people fall in the area of discovery or basic research and trying to find the answer to a question. Maybe you're trying to identify a particular pathway in cancer, or you're trying to figure out a specific target that might be druggable. And that's really on the discovery end of research, and I've characterized that as basic or discovery research. On the other hand, a lot of engineers, and perhaps the majority of the demographic at the biomaterials group here, focuses on applied research. What can we do to fix a problem? And so that's in the industry called development or pharmaceutical development. And it's really trying to move something forward into the clinic rather than trying to define a problem. Now, you need both. I don't want to discount either end of the spectrum here because you can't solve a problem unless you've carefully defined it. If you look at the group of people in front of us on the panel or on the slide here, we have people that span the whole gamut. Einstein would be more so on the discovery side. He's trying to describe things and develop theories. And then you have Henry Ford and Steve Jobs, and they're more so on the applied end. In fact, Henry Ford says he invented nothing new. He was totally away from the discovery side of things. He just took the discoveries of other people and used that to make progress in a specific area. And he states that if you do that and the timing is right and everything's aligned, then advancement is inevitable. And you just have to be the person who puts together the pieces correctly in order to solve a problem and move something forward. And there's a lot to be said for that philosophy. So again, you can think to yourself, what is my research goal as I go into the laboratory or govern a laboratory, run a laboratory, either whether it's in academia or in the private sector? Do you want to publish something? Do you want to be highly cited? Maybe you spend 3 years on one particular problem because you want to define something that's completely unique and no one has ever discovered or seen before. Do you want your research to appear to be sophisticated? Or maybe if you're a student, you just want to be able to defend it and get your degree and get out of town. On the other hand, maybe you want to do something that's elegant and simple or patentable and ultimately have some use or utility to people. And so then the question is, what makes something useful? And this is a Dilbert cartoon for those of you who are familiar with Dilbert. And he says, "My brainwave reader invention can control the nearest computer with my thoughts." And his boss says, "Why am I seeing a video of a blurry image that looks like you slapping another blurry image that looks like me?" And he says, "I don't think it's fair to complain about the video quality in the beta version." But that's something that Dilbert finds useful. His boss doesn't find it so useful. And in fact, maybe it doesn't work very well. But as we all know, something is useful if someone is willing to pay for it. And you know, as harsh as that sounds, maybe that sounds a little bit capitalistic or selfish, but it really, things have utility or use if someone is willing to give you money and buy it and use it. And so the iPhone is a great example of that. But a big question is, how do we figure that out? And large pharmaceutical companies have huge groups of people that do marketing research, market research, and try to divine that problem in order to figure out what people are willing to pay for. There's entire industries that just center around figuring out what the community at large in the United States and also worldwide are willing to pay for. And here we are, we're an individual, maybe in an academic lab or in an industry lab, and we're trying to figure that out as well. And sometimes we spend too much time in the scientific literature. We're only thinking about what's the science telling us that's missing or needed. And that usually is coming from another scientist. So they don't understand the market, they don't understand the public necessarily. So that's just something we have to consider and think about as we move forward in our research. Really one of the biggest questions is how do we take a basic thing like technology and connect it to a consumer, someone who's willing to pay for it. And the problem is we don't know what we don't know, that we don't know what we don't know. And that's really where marketing or understanding people, understanding what folks are willing to pay for, needs to try to connect with what we're inventing, the technology that we're working on, and how we're trying to push it forward. And we have no idea. Speaking as a younger faculty member, and especially when I just started as a faculty member, we have no idea. So let's just try something. And really, kind of at the beginning, and maybe even today, I felt like a used car salesman. We're focused on our technologies. We think our technologies are great. We don't necessarily know what people might use them for or what product it could be used to develop, but we're certainly pushing our technology and really excited about it. And here's a few technologies that were being pushed around the internet. I just did a few random searches on Google to find the latest and greatest technologies for you to enjoy. You can see some of these inventions maybe don't have usefulness for every person, but certainly someone finds them technologically advanced. I'm a fan of the Red Green show on public television, and his wife tasked him with making applesauce, and so he took his van and put some barrels on the side so he could make applesauce faster. Certainly a valuable technology, but perhaps only to one person. The one-wheeled motorcycle, this guy, I can't tell if this guy is excited or really, really scared about this one-wheeled motorcycle. Some other technology advances could help you on your commute or facilitate the process of buttering bread, which we all know can be quite difficult and technically demanding. And then there's some more real inventions that you've probably seen or are familiar with. If you look at the Segway, that was something that a lot of people thought would change the way folks get around cities and congested areas, and it really never took off. So really cool technology. It had gyroscopes in it to help it balance. You just leaned to go forward or backwards in different directions, but there just wasn't a big market for it. People weren't willing to pay for it. Cool technology. Also the Flowbee, this hair cutting machine on the lower right-hand side. Cool technology, right? You don't like getting hair all over yourself when you get your hair cut. It's great. But you don't see a single barber shop with one of these that I know of. Not that I visit the barber very often. You just have to take one look at me and you can see that's the case. And the self-stirring mug, I don't know if it's too expensive or what the problem is with the self-stirring mug, but maybe there's some people are worried about getting stuff in their coffee if you have a stir bar in the bottom of it. So here we are, we're sitting at this interface of wanting to develop the latest and coolest technology and move that forward. But at the same time, we don't necessarily know what the market looks like and where we're headed. So maybe we're just pushing technology in a direction that it shouldn't be going. And so I put on here the pathway to market that's typical for the pharmaceutical community. On the far left, you have discovery of a new chemical entity, and that goes through some patent filings and early evaluation in animals, all the way through toxicology in animals, and finally getting into the clinical trials, phase 1, 2, and 3, and moving towards approval. Now, that process can take anywhere from 7 years to a decade, and it's a very long, expensive pathway. There's a potential high reward, and that's why people continue to work in that space. But you better be very sure about your technology from the get-go if you're going to launch on this effort, because it is a long pathway. And along the way, what you're aiming for might move. So if you had the idea at the very beginning of your process that your technology would be perfect for an application like inhaled medicine, specifically to treat hypertension or pulmonary hypertension, and suddenly a person comes up with a pill, a company comes up with a pill to handle that. Well, people prefer pills to inhaling something or injecting something. So suddenly your market has moved, and along the way you ended up getting burned. You no longer have the same market that you thought you had when you started. There are shorter term opportunities. So along this continuum of development, from first identifying a new chemical entity to formulating it and getting it into animals and ultimately into people and hopefully showing some sort of efficacy or lack of side effects, there are different ways to enter that space. You don't have to take it from the beginning to the end. Maybe you developed a new process, and your process for manufacturing the drug is cheaper. Obviously, the return on that is going to be much smaller because maybe you're just optimizing a step along the way that someone else is taking to develop a drug. Maybe you came up with the formulation. And I used to think that the formulation or the delivery technology was the essential piece. It's like the cornerstone. If you pull it out, the whole building collapses. And it turns out in most cases it's really just not that valuable. There's people along the way, there's marketing and business development, there's the clinical trial planning and management. There's so many things that go into making a successful drug and making a successful biomaterial or medical device product that really you'd be lucky to just be a small piece of that. And another way to do it is to find someone that's working in industry and keep in close touch with them, ask them questions, be an insider. What problems are you specifically facing? What disease is your interest area? Maybe I should focus some of my research on your particular animal disease model because that's how you validate your research. And so if I'm in communication with people in industry, I can better target my research and then hopefully jump in and solve some problem for a company rather than launch off on my own and try to tackle the whole problem from soup to nuts, from the beginning to end. And a lot of that depends on what you know. So this is where your training can really come to fruition. And there's a folk tale that says Tesla visited Henry Ford at his factory, which was having a problem, and Ford asked Tesla if he could help identify the problem area. He walked up to a wall of boilerplates and made a small X on one of the plates, and Ford was thrilled, and that boilerplate was repaired and everything was fixed, and asked Tesla to send him an invoice. And the bill arrived for $10,000, which was a lot of money back in this particular time frame. And Ford asked for him to itemize that invoice, break it down for me. You spent like 2 minutes on the problem. And Tesla said it was $1 for marking the wall, so actually doing the work, and $9,999 for knowing where to put the mark. And that's sometimes where we as academics or educated folks with a PhD in a particular area or specialized training, maybe you know a special analytical tool or something, that's where we can really step in and maybe have an impact. But we have to know the problem. We have to know people at companies, or we at least have to be able to define those properly in our laboratory. This is just a quick map of my laboratory at the University of Kansas. So up at the top, we've launched a company called Savara Pharmaceuticals. I'm going to show maybe a slide on each of the companies and then talk a little bit about things we should learn from, or things that I have learned through the process, as well as a microencapsulation business, Orbis Biosciences. We do a little bit of work in the lower left-hand side in regenerative medicine and biomaterials. That's mostly in collaboration with Michael Dedamore, who some of you might know. He's regular at this meeting. And then we're interested in putting drugs in different compartments. So can we put drugs into the lymph node compartment? Or can we put drugs into the oral compartment, the GI tract, and have them not be absorbed into the body? And it's really just a drug delivery play. Can you put drugs so that they would have an effect at a particular site? Orbis Biosciences is a microencapsulation company. It was the first company I was able to co-found about 6 or 7 years ago. And the business is really to try to put drugs into small particles and extend the release. Some of the things I've learned from that company are when you work with industry, you should always listen first. Industry will tell you what problem they want solved. And sometimes as academics, we get really excited about solving small problems or going off on tangents. It's important not to do that. It's important to listen to them and find out what problem they want solved. If there's a change in the problem or a change in the project, you have to be able to adjust to the need quickly to meet the demands of your partner. And then you want to offer the right fix. For example, this car that's totaled out, you wouldn't offer to change the tire on that car. It's the one thing that's still intact on the entire car. So you have to be able to look at the problem, carefully define the problem with your partner, and then give them the right fix. Also, as small startup companies, we have a tendency to overvalue ourselves, overvalue our technology. A-Rod knows a little bit about that. Hopefully he won't watch this video, but I don't think he has access online. But don't overvalue yourself. Come up with a reasonable price point and negotiate a reasonable contract with a larger company. and always under-promise and over-deliver. Lots of times we have to decouple in our minds how exciting and wonderful we think our own technologies are, and come up with a reasonable set of expectations that we put in front of partners. And we always want to deliver more than what's asked for when we're in those types of relationships. The next company I want to just briefly mention is Savara Pharmaceuticals. And the concept was taking existing aerosol products and trying to improve their aerodynamic properties. And existing drug products are like the micronized drug crystal on the left-hand side. They have a drug microcrystal structure that's inhaled. Products like Advair and Symbicort, they use steroids and beta agonists that are in this big, chunky, sort of micronized format. And our thought was that we should take those micronized drugs and basically continue to grind them down and turn them into clumps of drug nanoparticles. The advantage of making them as aggregates of drug nanoparticles is they have a lot of space in between them. So now when you breathe through the powder, through the dosage form, it's much more easy to aerosolize the dosage form. And we were able to cut the dose of steroids to about 1/4 of the existing product. And this is an example of that. So we compared ourselves head-to-head with an existing product, Pulmicort Flexhaler, which uses budesonide microparticles. We made a nanocluster formulation, and the plot on the bottom shows you the different cutoff sizes for the particles. If you're to the left of the red line, you're essentially landing in the mouth or trachea. And if you're to the right of the red line, you're making finer and finer particles that travel deeper into the lungs. And so if you sum the area under the curve for both of those, you basically can figure out that you only have to deliver about 1/4 of the steroid. And maybe people don't care. So what? Just have them take 4 times the dose. It's not that big a deal. So you have to define then, based on your advantage, you have to define what application you're going to go after. And so we went after the application of pediatric patients that can't take too many steroids. So if we could dose spare steroids and only have to give them 20 to 25% of the typical dose, maybe that's the right market to go after. However, after working with 3 major companies for a couple of years on that project, something happened in the industry. Those companies were merged with other large companies, or they were acquired. And you can imagine what happened to our projects with them. They were kind of left on the end of the fishing pole hanging, and there was nothing we could do. We couldn't advance it. And so we decided, you know what, we're going to stop doing that. We're going to stop working with large companies because they have a tendency to be a little bit fickle. They follow their internal trends and pipelines and things like that. And so we said we're going to be the master of our own destiny. And we developed a product called AeroVanc. It's an inhaled version of the antibiotic. It's an IV antibiotic, vancomycin. And it's now in phase 2 clinical trials. And it appears to be progressing pretty well. But it's very simple. It's taking a drug that's been around for 50 years as an IV drug, reformulating as an aerosol to treat multi-drug resistant lung infections in cystic fibrosis patients. So through that process, our companies and myself, we learned to be plastic. So if something doesn't work out, be prepared to make a move and do the next thing. And also be willing to let your baby go. I had to take that technology and put it on the shelf because we went with something else. We went with a spray-dried formulation that was already scaled, and I had to put my baby to bed for a while. And sometimes we hang on so tightly to our technologies that we stand in the way of advancing them. And I'll just leave you with one comment from Einstein. He said, "Any intelligent fool can make things bigger, more complex, and more violent. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction." And that's my opinion, is that's really where we need to be moving as people that are working on technologies and trying to put them out to the public. It has to be simple because that's the only way that it's going to scale, reach a large number of people and advance. So again, think about what you're working on every day and ask yourself if you're really addressing the right questions and have carefully defined the problem. If your goal is to move into the direction of translational research, it's got to be simple, patentable, and useful to the public. Thank you.